Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to Everything Compliance. Everything Compliance is the only podcast in compliance featuring the top roundtable of compliance commentators. It includes Mike Volkov, founder of the Volkov Law Group, Matt Kelly, founder and editor of Radical Compliance, Jonathan Armstrong, partner at Quarterly Compliance, and Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitors with Affiliated Monitors. First, have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? As I have founded the Compliance Podcast Network, I'm always looking for new podcasts. If you have wanted to start a podcast but were at a loss as to how to do so, please listen to a message from today's sponsor, One Stone Creative.
If you are enjoying this show, you might enjoy hosting your own. As an expert in your field, you have skills, knowledge, and insight that can help you expand your practice, meet new people, and create amazing content to share with the world. In as little as 2 hours a week, you can dramatically change how you promote, fill, and position your business. And One Stone Creative can show you how. Learn more at onestonecreative.net.
Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox again. This week we have 4 separate presentations, and I'm sitting in for Mike Volkov, who is on assignment. Matt Kelly talks about the recent SEC whistleblower award of $50 million to 2 claimants. Jonathan Armstrong talks about the OECD presentation he heard at the recent SEC Europe conference and goes into detail about some of the numbers. Jay Rosen considers a Hollywood story, how a studio head stepped down because of a personal relationship he had with an actress and certainly conflict of interest problems. I take a crack at a compliance-based solution to help stem the opioid crisis. Everything Compliance is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Matt Kelly, you've been thinking about whistleblowers, whistleblower awards, and the SEC again. What have you been thinking about?
Well, I have been thinking, Tom, about this interesting whistleblower award that the SEC has doled out. They did it on March 26th, I believe. This was a fairly big award, $50 million split between 2 different claimants. Claimant number 1 received $13 million. Claimant number 2 received $37 million. I think claimant number 2, that's one of the biggest awards that the SEC has ever given out. It is not the biggest, but it's within the top 3 or 4. The SEC now has this very slick top 10 awards kind of webpage that you can check out that it updates regularly. But really, what was interesting about this case are the details about why claimant 1 got 13, why did claimant 2 get more, and it got a lot more. And then also we have this mystery claimant 4 who got nothing and was complaining that I'm presuming it's a he should have got more, but he was not entitled to anything. So let me try and unpack this a little bit. What is interesting first is that claimant number 1, and I'll just identify them by their numbers. Claimant number 1 was the first person to submit a claim that got an award, where his lawyer approached the SEC. Note, these claimants now all have counsel before they even show up at the SEC with a tip. But the lawyer approached the SEC to say that they would be filing a tip shortly, which led the SEC to open a case. And sure enough, several days later, the tip came in and it was good. So the SEC was pursuing along there. Then along comes claimant number 2, who arrived sometime later. I'm not clear on exactly when. Claimant number 2 was talking about the same company. We don't know which company this is. I have heard rumors that it is a large investment bank, and we can get to why that may or may not be true in a moment or two. But claimant number 2 shows up with a very similar complaint about the same company, and the SEC opens a second related investigation into the same company, quickly decides to consolidate both claimant 1 and 2 cases into this sort of multi-pronged investigation. Claimant 2, why did they get nearly 3 times as much money as claimant number 1? Again, we're not exactly sure, but this person also showed up with a lawyer, provided, quote, information and documentation that were highly significant, high quality, critically important, akin to smoking gun evidence, close quote. That is from the SEC. So this person clearly had the goods on his or her company. and cooperated extensively, met with the SEC several times, and bingo, you get a $37 million payout. Claimant number one only got $13 million because he was unreasonably delayed, quote unquote, in bringing his allegations to the SEC. And this is interesting because the SEC noted, while claimant number one was taking his time getting to the SEC, investors were suffering more harm because the misconduct was continuing. So the eventual settlement from the company was larger. And what do you get a percentage of with your whistleblower award? You get a percentage of the settlement. So the SEC noted, the longer you took to bring this information to us, the bigger the settlement was because more harm was happening. So you had an economic incentive, claimant number one, to take your sweet time and then get a bigger payout. No dice. You get $13 million. That is the long and the short of what happened with claimant number one. So one other footnote, of course, and this gets back to why this company may be an investment bank of some kind, I think, because the SEC does not specify exactly which other agency there was, but some other agency out there was also investigating this company. And claimant number two also went to that other agency, got a second whistleblower award payment from that other agency for another related sort of complaint. So claimant number one maybe could have even won more money than $37 million, except that would have been essentially double dipping, which the SEC did not want to encourage. So it discounted the payment that the SEC gave to claimant number two. But how many other enforcement agencies out there do pay whistleblower rewards? The Justice Department can do it. Health regulators can do it. The CFTC can do it. So an investment bank can get into a lot of different trouble with a lot of different agencies. I suspect this may be a Wall Street bank. There may be press reports out there that have identified this company. I don't know. I just posted this the other day. I'm not quite sure. But clearly there's a lot of interesting facts here. But it shows yet again that these whistleblowers are well-placed people with very good information who are hiring very good lawyers to represent them to the SEC to get some very lucrative paydays. And even when you are pulling something a little bit sketchy, like claimant number one taking his sweet time, if you got less than what you could have, but you still get $13 million, that's still a lot. So there's all sorts of economic incentive for whistleblowers to work with the Whistleblower Inc. plaintiff bar to go to the SEC and other regulators. And this is a fact of life that compliance officers have to accept. But I did want to, however, spend a little bit of time also talking about mystery claimant number four. Claimant number four did not receive an award related to this company for this sort of misconduct, although claimant number four had actually gone to a regional office of the SEC 3 days before claimant number one had kind of put the ball in motion. And claimant number four had already won a different whistleblower award for this same company. So at this point, I think we need a visual flow chart about who's getting what awards and why do these people keep showing up. But claimant number four, his information was, at first he said, I should get an award because I came to the SEC first. And the SEC said, well, no, you went to a regional office. You did get there 3 days before, but it was on another matter that was not sufficiently related to claimant number one and two. So they get first dibs, and they put this investigation into motion, not you. So you don't score on that prong. Then claimant number four's lawyers came back and said, well, okay, but we still gave you a lot of information. And so then the SEC came back with its consent order, with its award order, and said, well, yes, you gave us a lot of information, but it had no actual value. So if you give us information that it really is of no value to us in our investigation, then you don't get an award even if you showed up 3 days earlier. So please, claimant number four, go away. But claimant number four petitioned several times for reconsideration, and claimant number four's lawyers lost that appeal. So claimant number four gets no money. People might ask, what happened to claimant number three? I don't know. the SEC's award order remained silent on any claimant number 3. We went straight from 1 and 2 to 4. There was another claimant number 7. So again, 5 and 6. I don't know who they were. They weren't mentioned either. Claimant number 7 also had tried to get a slice of the action and also had provided a tip of no value related to this matter. So the SEC said, forget it. But all of this just shows that this is a very sophisticated whistleblower lobby out there. And I do know that compliance officers get driven a little bit nuts by this whistleblower plaintiff bar, that really it can be financially quite lucrative for people. Your frustrations and irritation may not be unjustified, but nonetheless, the law is the law. It does allow these sort of things, and we are where we are. So, Tom, that's all the whistleblower award issues. If you want, I can give you another quick rundown on where we are with the SEC's proposed reforms to whistleblower awards as well, if we have another minute or two.
We do. That'd be great, Matt.
So we're nowhere on that, but I can expand for another minute or two on that point. You might recall that last summer, the SEC had proposed a package of whistleblower reforms that would give the SEC more discretion to issue smaller awards that maybe led to smaller resolutions. And, that is actually what most tips lead to. They're relatively small tips about small frauds that get small settlements. And perhaps a whistleblower settlement would be so small that the whistleblower wouldn't get an award. It would be below the threshold. One idea was to lower that so the SEC would have more discretion there. Good. However, there was also a proposed cap through a sort of big arithmetical rigmarole that the SEC would go through that essentially would cap large awards at roughly not more than $30 million. So that would have prohibited claimant number 2 from getting the award that he did. The SEC had also proposed making it harder for outsiders to study companies and report what they suspect is fraud, but it would not apply to insiders who go with legitimately good inside intelligence about misconduct and want it rooted out. But it would prevent sort of the professional researchers who want to blow the whistle on fraud, and they're independent of the company, and they might get investment from somebody from Whistleblower Inc., and then they represent, and then they get a slice of the action. The SEC would like to tamp that down. However, that was last summer, and now we're here, and there's been no further action. We don't know when the SEC might act on these rules. We don't know if it might act on them. There are many voices, mostly on the Democratic side, who would say that the SEC actually doesn't have legal authority to cap whistleblower awards. I suspect if Chairman Jay Clayton moved forward with this, he would find himself subject to a lawsuit from somebody or other in federal court pretty quick. There are dozens of comments on the SEC's website devoted to the whistleblower reforms and those proposals. Actually, there are thousands of them, but thousands of them are sort of these clone comments that are from a generic form. I don't count those. But there are still dozens and dozens of comments from individuals who did not use the form letters. They're pro, they're con, they seem to be mostly against the reforms, but there are a few that say this is justified. It's worth noting that other Western nations do cap whistleblower rewards. I think Canada, caps awards at $5 million. And you know what? Canada's still standing. It's still a functioning capital markets up there. So it may or may not come to pass in the United States. I don't know that it would be the fall of the republic if we did cap awards, but I don't know that we will. And I have no idea when we might even try. But that is where we are with whistleblower awards right now.
Jonathan Armstrong, what is on your mind?
Well, thanks, Tom. I was at the SCCE European event in Berlin this month, and we had a number of interesting talks. But one that I thought might be worth just mentioning was a talk by Drago Kos of the OECD about bribery and corruption. I would say from the start that I thought the most interesting talk of the event wasn't this one in presentational terms. There was an excellent talk by the journalist who led the the Paradise Papers breach, where he looked in real time at the first email from his mole/whistleblower onwards. But in terms of content, I thought the Dragoko's talk was worth talking about. He talked about the history of the fight to globalize the war against corruption, if you like. And we've talked about this before, about how the US has done a disproportionate amount of the heavy lifting in terms of anti-bribery enforcement, followed behind, but not closely behind, by the UK and Canada. And one of the things he talked about that was interesting, I thought, was the impact of Brexit on the fight against corruption. And he basically said that the UK had been trying to bring a lot of consensus around the world on anti-corruption. There'd obviously been the London summit in 2016, and he regretted the fact that the UK had become almost more insular and inward-looking because of the political, what would you call it, other than disaster that we've had since, that is, Brexit. But that negativity aside, he looked at some figures in terms of sectors where the most bribery cases are reported. So none of this is a surprise. The extractive industries are still at 19%, despite you having left that sector, Tom. Construction at 15%, transportation and storage 15%, IT 10%. In 41% of the cases, it was management that paid or authorized the bribe. The CEO himself paid the bribe in 12% of cases. It's 27% of bribes are paid to employees of public enterprises, followed by customs officials, health officials, and then defense. And the bribes are considerable. I can remember a really good talk on this by one of the CFOs at Siemens in Hungary, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when they talked about the fact that these aren't, regular commissions of 2 or 3%. On average, according to the figures that were presented, the bribe is 10.9% of the transaction value, but staggeringly 34.5% of the profit on the deal. So you're losing a third of your profit by paying bribes. And this wasn't talked about at the SCCE, but the fascinating bit about Siemens is that oftentimes the paying of a bribe can tip a deal that is only just worth doing to a deal where you're actually paying somebody money for the privilege of making a loss. Again, because in the Siemens world, as an overgeneralization, they rewarded people on turnover, not on profit. He said that 1 in 3 cases came to the authorities through self-reporting, then law enforcement, then mutual legal assistance were joint second. The internal audits are the principal cause for self-reporting, but the fact that there's M&A activity is just behind that. So 28% of self-reports are made through due diligence in M&A. So again, a reminder there to people to get their M&A teams really fine-tuned to looking at bribery. And then one of the other interesting slides he showed, I thought, was the progress report in 2018 of enforcement of the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention. And he put the countries that had signed up into 4 rankings. So countries with little or no enforcement were 22 countries in total, who between them account for 39.6% of world exports. And some of the notable offenders in that category are China, as some might expect, but some of the perhaps more surprising ones like Japan, Singapore, Ireland, Belgium, Denmark, Luxembourg, and Finland. So they've had little or no enforcement. It might be, of course, because they have no bribes at all, although other statistics, certainly for some of those countries, would not seem to enforce that, to confirm that. In Band 2, the countries with limited enforcement, we have countries like France, the Netherlands, and Canada, and that obviously conflicts with, sometimes with our perception that Canada obviously has been involved in some cases. There's a lot of investigations going on in France under Sapin, but obviously none of them reaching a conclusion in time to be included in those figures. Band 3 of countries that have got moderate enforcement has just 4 countries in it: Brazil, Australia, Sweden, and Portugal. And top of the league, those countries with active enforcement, there's just 7 countries there. The good news is they account for 27% of world exports. And those good countries are US, Germany, Israel, Italy, Norway, the UK, and Switzerland. So I know that's a little bit more stat heavy than most of my contributions. There's probably more statistics in that, Tom, I think, than all of my contributions to this podcast to date. But I thought it was interesting to look at some of the arithmetic, and in some cases, I think it contrasts with our perception of those countries that are getting tough.
Jonathan, I have a question for you, and it really is one of the statistics which was near the end of your opening remarks about not only the average cost of a bribe in terms of the overall transaction value, but of the profit, which frankly I was stunned that it was almost 34% of the average profit. You also talked about that in terms of the incentives that drive salespersons to make these types of deals that actually lose money. That strikes me as a really solid number you can take to a company and ask them to not only look or to demonstrate the cost to them of bribery and corruption, but also a way to think through putting in a program to disincentivize salespersons from making these kinds of deals.
Yeah, I think that's dead right. And this isn't something that was mentioned in the talk, but in the Siemens work that I saw, as I say, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, they had this really interesting pattern that they'd discovered in a lot of their bribery. And what they found is that paying the bribe oftentimes didn't guarantee you the job. It gave you information on the price that other people were putting in for the job. So let's say it's a contract to refurbish your luxury sedan, Tom. I don't get the job by paying your mechanic a bribe. I get the opportunity to know the best bid. And obviously, to get the work, I've got to undercut that guy's bid. So I'm already bidding low, and I've got to pay a bribe to secure the information to bid low. And what tends to happen in public tenders is even worse, because it might be a 3-year contract. I've paid somebody money for the opportunity to bid lower than everybody else. But the public official involved has just got, in this case, he's just got, if the statistics are right, he's just got 10% of the contract value handed to him. Now, does the public official think in 2019, well, that's my payday until 2021, 2022, when the tenders for renewal? Or does he say, do you know what? I'm going to put this stuff out to tender every year instead of 3 years. So I know I promised you a 3-year deal, but it's going to be a 1-year deal. And then what happens, of course, when it comes around for tender next time, is the guys who thought their bid was low and didn't win, reduce their bid. And again, I've only paid for information on what they've bid. So you get where I'm going with this. The price spirals down to the extent that Siemens said in some of their cases, they might have a margin of minus 10% because their bid has to be low to win. And they're paying a guy 10% for the privilege of losing 10%. So sometimes it gets completely crazy, partly because, as I say, sometimes sales guys are remunerated on turnover, not profit, and sometimes because they have officials who know the system better than they do. And obviously, if you paid a guy a bribe and you're in a Western company and you think he's somewhat unethical, you can't really ring your company's helpline and say, well, I paid this guy a bribe for a piece of work and he's put it out to tender again. You know, there's nobody you can ring to complain about a corrupt official that you corrupted.
So, Jay Rosen, what is on your mind?
I got a little bit of a Hollywood story to share with you guys. And
Hurrah!
Hurrah! About a week ago Monday, the Wall Street Journal pushed out a developing story headline that said, quote, Warner Brothers chairman, CEO Kevin Tsujihara to step down. Without knowing any recent background about this executive or Warner Brothers' recent performance at the box office, I presume that hearing this news that early on a Monday morning, there could only be one explanation. So I immediately texted a colleague in the compliance and ethics field and typed out, quote, more hashtag me too, question mark, close quote. And my colleague replied back, most probably. As the morning progressed, we learned that in an article in the Hollywood Reporter on March 6, text messages between this executive and an actress named Charlotte Kirk revealed that Tsujihara said that he would push for auditions for her amid an apparent sexual relationship they were involved in. Kirk went on to appear in two Warner Brothers films, 2016's How to Be Single and 2018's Ocean 8. Tsujihara's personal attorney stated that Mr. Tsujihara had no direct role in hiring this actress. An outside law firm continued to investigate the claims made against Tsujihara. Warner Brothers and a major reorganization announced on March 4th that Tsujihara had been given additional responsibilities within the group, which is now known as Warner Media. A week later, on March 13th, the Hollywood Reporter again detailed that for the third time in a 16-month span, Tsujihara was the subject of an internal investigation about his relationship with the actress. A Warner Media representative said that prior investigations concluded that it did not find impropriety in Kirk's casting in the two films. But according to a knowledgeable source, the company is treating text messages between Tsujihara, 54, and Kirk, 26, as new information. Time Warner first launched an investigation by an undisclosed law firm back in November of 2017 as reporters began calling about the couple's relationship. At that point, Ocean's 8 had wrapped and rumors about Kirk's casting had begun to swirl. The issue reared its ugly head nearly a year later when a letter penned by somebody going by the name, quote, social justice warrior, unquote, was sent to Stanky, the new head of the Warner Brothers division from AT&T, in September 2018. The letter once again raised a series of explosive questions about a top Warner Brothers exec who promised roles to an actress only identified as CK, which happens to be the actress's initials. In response, Warner Media retained the law firm Munger, Tolles & Olson to investigate. The law firm was not involved in the first investigation is not involved in the current one. Again, no wrongdoing was found. Hang on one sec. Basically, for the good of the Warner Brothers, studio, Suji Howard decided to step down, and he shared this note with his team at Warner Brothers. Dear colleagues, over the past week and a half, I've been reflecting on how the attention on my past actions might impact the company's future. After lengthy introspection and discussions with John Stenke over the past week, we've decided that it is in Warner Brothers' best interest that I step down as chairman. He went on to say that he loves the company and the people that make it so great, and he's been honored to head the organization and work alongside all these talented people over the past 25 years. Together, we've built the studio into an unequivocal leader in the industry. It seems that his love for the company was unfortunately not enough to stop him from abusing his power. So back to the opening question that I asked after having my sarcastic instincts confirmed, I had to step back and wonder, why was I immediately so cynical? Was it because I had previously worked in the motion picture industry and heard a horror story of a male friend who was working as an assistant to a top producer on a noted Hollywood lot? When my friend had not updated the producer's phone call sheet quick enough, he was soon on the receiving end of a scalding hot cup of coffee pegged at him in disgust by the producer. Next stop, the HR department, where a settlement was hastily offered and accepted, and within the hour, a new assistant, was trying his luck updating the call sheet. We've unfortunately seen similar things happen, whether we're talking about confirmation of a Supreme Court justice, whether we're looking at a gymnastics team, whether we're looking at a football team where a known pedophile is aided and embedded in what he's doing. And unfortunately, it's the story, again, of the powerful taking advantage of the powerless. Harassment, rape, human trafficking, it's horrible, it's disgusting, and it has to stop. There's a list of names that I compiled, starting with Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, Louis C.K., Al Franken, Larry Nassar, Jeffrey Tambor, Charlie Rose, John Lasseter from Pixar, Les Moonves, Bill O'Reilly, Steve Wynn, Matt Lauer, R. Kelly. This roll call of shame spans industries, all industries, hospitality, media, music, politics, and sports. While my ethics and compliance colleagues are always looking to create more diverse corporate boards and C-suites, sadly, this latest chapter of the Me Too movement has shown some diversity with the addition of Kevin Sujihara to the list. Unfortunately, this is not the diversity I had in mind.
So, Jay, is this just more Me Too, or do you really see this as an inflection point?
I think it is. I don't know if I would go as far to call it an inflection point, but it looks like now we're in a situation where it's just, I think, all about absolute power and absolute power corrupting, that people just do not want to get the message. And it just, like I said at the beginning, be so sarcastic and already prejudge somebody on 50 characters that come out over a cell phone. It really, I think, seems to be that people are just really falling back into their old ways. And, maybe we've got to do something more than just having a Twitter handle, that there really needs to be more executive buy-in, and there needs to be more transparency. And I think that's something that we're looking for in all arenas and all the subject matters that we discuss, every month or so. It comes back to some kind of transparency and people, with the cover-up being worse than the crime.
Well, Jay, the thing that struck me was, I think you said that Time Warner performed an investigation and cleared him.
Twice, and this actually 3 times he got cleared. So how robust was that investigation? And it probably seems, in retrospect, not much more than a rubber stamp. And there's more dirt and stuff that I could have added in, but I wanted to just try to be linear about this, but there are other producers and directors who Sujihara also had handed Miss Kirk off to try to get her into more movies.
Okay, so I'm going to sit in today, as I indicated, for Mike Volkov, who is currently on assignment. What's on my mind is a paper or white paper, blog post, and interview I did with Jay's affiliated monitor colleague, Jesse Kaplan, a couple of weeks ago that I posted this week. And the topic was emerging issues in healthcare monitorships. But Jesse said we had a couple of episodes that struck me as really some of the most important things I'd heard in the compliance profession because it was around the opioid crisis. And Jesse really laid out a way to help think through a part of a solution to the opioid crisis. There's multiple issues in the opioid crisis, and certainly the regulators have a role, enforcers have a role, pharmaceutical companies have a role, but I never really thought about compliance as having a role. And Jesse laid out for me just a elegant business solution to help the fight the opioid crisis. So I called it the Opioid Prescription Compliance Program. And for any compliance practitioners listening to this podcast, it's going to sound extraordinarily familiar because it all starts with a risk assessment. Healthcare organizations and medical practices can be proactive by putting the compliance program in place that I'm suggesting, but it all starts with a risk assessment. What is your risk around? So some of the has a physician check the state's prescription drug monitoring program database for the patient's prescribing history? Has the physician counseled the patient on alternatives as well as the risks of opioids? Jesse suggested a pain contract that discussed not only pain management, but also the rights and obligations of the patient. And then finally, in great Tom Fox fashion, document. Is all of this documented in the medical records of the patient so that others could review this? The program would also inform both the practitioner and the patient on the limitations of prescribing, quantity and dosage, and what combination of drugs might be indicated. The program should address the follow-up the physician should engage in with the patient after prescribing the opioids. So what needs to be done if there's a request for a renewal of a prescription, for instance? Can there be a blood test or urine screen? Those are important because a blood test would tell a physician if a patient has taken the correct number of pills or medicine that's been prescribed. If they come back clean on their tox screen, that means they haven't taken the pills, which means they may have sold them going forward. So it starts with a risk assessment. Then it moves to education. So some of the questions I posed are clearly educational communications to educate both the physician and / healthcare provider and the patient as well. Then it moves to a monitoring phase. I talked about the blood testing or other ongoing monitoring, but it's also the patient with the pain contract has an obligation, and that obligation is communicated to them. So it's really a way to think through a business response to a legal problem, but not just a legal problem, a societal problem. And when you can put together a compliance solution that really helps a business, because this is certainly something that large healthcare providers such as hospitals or hospital systems could do. But what about for the smaller single physician, if there are any left, or the doctor who's in a group practice? That's where Jesse's experience as a independent integrity monitor, I thought, added another level of nuance and taking away the complexity, because someone like Jesse can come in, or affiliated monitors can come in and perform this ongoing monitoring as an independent third party, reporting back to a state regulator if they need that information, or simply providing that information should a regulator ever come knocking. So it was really a elegant solution to just a horrific healthcare crisis in a way that I had never thought about. But if you think about the business solution to the legal problem of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and bribery and corruption, certainly from my experience in the energy industry in Houston, I have seen companies not only implement best practices compliance programs, but also require that of all of their counterparties. They require that of any contractor doing business with them. They require that direct first-party contractor to do the same with its contractor. So it pushes it down the entire supply chain. And Jesse's real innovation for me was, well, let's just take that model, which is a business solution to a legal problem, and I would lay on healthcare problem, and let's put that in place in the opioid prescribing area. So why can't you have that type of solution? It would lead to, I think, at the end of the day, more efficient operations, and it would certainly take away the immediate risk, the immediate healthcare risk of overprescribing of opioids, because certainly from Jesse's perspective, most physicians are in the business of medicine to do good, and they are not liars, cheaters, or criminals engaging in massive fraud. There are those persons in healthcare, unfortunately, and those can be picked up in a variety of other ongoing monitoring and mechanisms. But for the physician or healthcare service or healthcare provider that wants to stay in compliance with the law, it's really an elegant solution to a very difficult crisis. So it was really eye-opening for me to hear him walk through that. I've just highlighted some of the aspects. I'm going to link to the full podcast in the show notes, and I hope everyone who has not listened to his podcast will do so. But it was really something that I thought was a great solution, a compliance solution, and even more than a compliance solution, a business process solution. So, gentlemen, with that, we are going to move to shout outs and rants. So we'll go through the same order. Jonathan Armstrong, we are recording this on Friday, March 25th, the Free Britain Day, or not. So are there any things that might be on your mind?
Well, there's an obvious thing on my mind that I'm too depressed to talk about. But so I'm going to give two shout outs, if I may. The first is to Nicola Howard QC. So I'm ashamed to say I missed her party last night because I had a client meeting that ran over, but Nicola's just been made a QC. She did a lot of work in connection with deferred prosecution agreements in the UK, both in terms of the consultation and in terms of helping practitioners understand the proposals every step of the way. So I just wanted to say well done, Nicola. And I would also like to say well done to British Airways. I believe that there is something going on in the UK today. I can't quite remember what to do with trade and international trade. But British Airways, I think, are bucking the trend of despondency. How so, you might ask? Well, apparently, according to a hearing in the Nigerian Senate on Tuesday, and according to the Nigerian Agriculture Minister, Audi Ogba, British Airways are partially responsible for some issues with the food industry in Nigeria. And the reason is apparently that you can order a pizza from London and have it delivered via British Airways. And I thought I'd do a little bit of research into how that is possible. Now, I didn't know that Nigerians were great fans of British pizzas. And it does seem a little bit of a challenge in that the flight time is 6 hours, 50 minutes. But it does seem possible. You can get your pizza to the gate for $9.45 at Heathrow. Apparently, you have to order it yourself. BA do the transportation, not the cooking. And then that pizza would then arrive $17.25 in Lagos, just in time for an early dinner in the evening. So I didn't know that Nigerians were fans of cold British pizza. I guess much in the same way as Elvis would fly hamburgers around the world. But in these times of turbulent deals and trading environments, shout out to British Airways for their Domino's-style innovation.
Jay Rosen.
So first, a shout out to Matt Kelly, who is not physically on the phone with us right now. He will be folded into the podcast, but he is with some of our Boston area ethics and compliance folks at the SCCE Regional Boston Conference today on Friday the 29th. So hope that's going well. And then I want to recognize that today's subtitle for the episode is "We're in First Place," aka the Houston Astros, and we're in last place, the 2018 World Champions Red Sox. So I guess for the next 6 months or so, I'll still be able to talk about the World Championship, but I just wanted to give you your due right now, Tom.
So I'm going to give I'm not sure if this is a shout out or a rant, but it goes to former Wells Fargo CEO Tim Sloan, who after a frankly disastrous 2.5 years as the chief executive of Wells Fargo resigned effective immediately yesterday. He had been with the company for 31 years. He took over the company after the fraudulent accounts scandal broke back in 2016. And it's just been one fumble bump after another for Sloan as additional scandals have come out. He couldn't seem to turn on the lights around ethics and compliance at the organization. There's still no one on the board with that sort of expertise. But he resigned. So maybe he realized he wasn't the guy. I don't know if it's unclear from the reporting whether or not he resigned to pursue other opportunities or whether it was more forced than that, or if it was really due to his abysmal congressional testimony. But nevertheless, Tim Sloan is out. Wells Fargo has put in as interim president, most interestingly, their general counsel. The general counsel was the former head of Cravath Swaine, really one of the top law firms in the United States, who came on board in 2017 as GC to help him get through that. And he's now been appointed as interim CEO. Whatever you might or might not think about a lawyer being an interim CEO, at least he's an outsider. The senior management at Wells Fargo is still a longtime Wells Fargo folks, so it may not surprise many people that they really wouldn't be able to change when you have the same people claiming they're doing different things, but perhaps not. So shout out to Tim Sloan for resigning. Rant on Wells Fargo in the several years since the original scandal broke. Really can't seem to find their left foot from their other left foot. Matt Kelly, do you have a rant or shout out for us today?
I do. I have a rant against the Trump administration for nominating Stephen Moore to be seated on the Federal Reserve Board, which President Trump did in the tail end of March. If you have not been following this nomination, it probably is worth following because it exemplifies a few bad practices that we have seen with the Trump administration. Stephen Moore, number one, is not an economist. Number two, he is a highly political figure, very divisive, very much on the conservative side of the political spectrum. It's not necessarily that there is anything wrong with that, except the Federal Reserve Board is really intended to be an apolitical body that sets interest rates and monetary policy. And I fear that if we start injecting partisan politics especially the sort of blindly Trump loyalist right-wing politics that we have seen from many Trump appointees, if we start bringing that into the Federal Reserve and into the discussions we have about monetary policy, that is just nothing good comes from that. And, Tom, if you and I want to get into the weeds some other day about monetary policy, we can. Suffice to say right now, this is just monetary policy dictates the value of money that we all have, that the country has as a whole, that we individually have in our bank accounts. If we start screwing that up with partisan politics, either way, I would probably say the same about having somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the Federal Reserve Board, for example, because she is just as nutty in her monetary policy ideas on the left as Stephen Moore is on the right. But this would lead to more economic volatility, possibly more inflation, more boom and bust cycles. We don't need that. We haven't had that kind of stuff in this country for quite a long time. The financial crisis was one aberration in an otherwise very smooth 30 years of monetary constancy, and we don't want to lose that as a country. Plus, as a side complaint that I have here, President Trump only nominated Stephen Moore because Moore wrote this very sycophantic op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that somebody put in front of the president's nose. I don't even think that the president read that op-ed, but they said, here's Stephen Moore, who thinks you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, and the Fed should not have raised interest rates in December. They should be cutting rates. And so Trump said, you know what, sounds good. Steve, you want the nomination? And then, boom, we're off to the races. Nominated him on Twitter, and, no vetting, no proper thought. And then, of course, after the nomination came out, lo and behold, it turns out that Stephen Moore is $75,000 in the red on a tax bill that he owes to the state of Maryland. So he is one of these people who says tax cuts will pay for themselves. There's really no other economist that agrees with that. And by the way, they don't pay for themselves. But he's taken it to this personal extreme, I guess, because he isn't even paying his own taxes. And yet he's going to now maybe be on the Fed board dictating how the economy might run for us and the whole world. So I hope the Senate comes to its senses and shoots down his nomination, because he might be fit for some other things, but for the Fed board, he's a quack. And we don't need a quack on the Fed board. So that's my rant.
So, gentlemen, as always, it's been grand. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Everything Compliance. If you have any questions on the Everything Compliance gang, you can email Jonathan at jonathan.armstrong@quarterlycompliance.com, Matt Kelly at mkelly@radicalcompliance.com, Jay Rosen at j.rosen@affiliatedmonitors.com, Mike Volkov at mvolkov@volkovlawgroup.com, and I'm Tom Fox at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I hope you'll join us again in a couple of weeks when the Everything Compliance gang returns to discuss some of the topics of the day. Everything Compliance is a presentation of the Compliance Podcast Network.